The fluorescent lights of the emergency room flickered overhead, casting an antiseptic glow across the row of plastic chairs where a young woman sat, her delicate hands clutching the hem of her cardigan as if it were a shield. Her name was Lila Everhart, and she was the sort of girl who avoided attention at all costs. A shy librarian who preferred the company of dog-eared novels to bustling crowds. But tonight, she could not hide. Lila's cheeks burned crimson as she shifted uncomfortably on the hard seat. She had tried to convince herself her condition would pass, that it was just a fluke, a momentary embarrassment that could be willed away. But the persistent, alarming discomfort deep in her body made it impossible to pretend any longer. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, she had finally come to the ER, hoping the faceless anonymity of the night shift would swallow her shame. She never expected to meet him. Dr. Nathan Hale strode through the triage area with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen every possible emergency and learned to remain unflappable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with impeccably styled dark hair and eyes the color of smoke. Though his lab coat was embroidered with his title, most of the staff whispered about the truth behind his name. The young, reclusive millionaire who'd chosen to work in public hospitals rather than sit behind a gleaming desk, spending his family fortune. Tonight, his gaze swept the waiting room, searching for the next patient. When he called her name, Lila's heart tripped in her chest. "Miss Everhart?" His voice was unexpectedly warm. "Would you like to come with me?" She rose shakily, avoiding his eyes, wishing the floor might open and swallow her. As she followed him past the curtain into exam room 4, she couldn't help noticing how the nurses seemed to pause, watching Dr. Hale with curious admiration. He gestured to the narrow bed. "You can sit here," he said gently. "Take your time." Lila swallowed, trying to find her voice. I'm sorry," she stammered, her hands twisting in her lap. "This is really embarrassing." "I promise you, there's no need to feel that way," he assured her. "Whatever brings you here tonight, I've probably seen it before." His kindness only made her blush harder. She drew in a shuddering breath and explained, haltingly, that she had been experiencing an intimate discomfort she'd never felt before, pain that grew sharper by the hour. Nathan listened intently, never once breaking eye contact. Most patients, he knew, expected a flicker of judgment when they spoke of private symptoms. He made it a point to never let it happen. When she finished, he nodded calmly. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that. You did the right thing by coming in." He donned gloves and began his examination with a professional thoroughness that, to Lila's surprise, was almost reassuring. As he worked, he spoke in a low, steady voice about possible causes, an infection, an allergic reaction, perhaps an untreated cyst. Though his words were clinical, there was a softness in the way he looked at her that made her chest ache. At last, he straightened and removed his gloves. "I'm going to run some tests to be sure. You'll be more comfortable soon." "Thank you," she whispered. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. She didn't know what it was, only that the vulnerable, humiliated girl she'd been when she walked in now felt seen, understood in a way she hadn't expected from a stranger. Nathan turned to enter the orders into the computer. But before he did, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "You're very brave, you know," he said softly. "A lot of people would have ignored this and suffered in silence. You took care of yourself. That matters." The words lodged themselves in her heart. While she waited for her test results, Lila tried not to look at the clock. She was aware of every shift of her body, every reminder of why she was here. But she also found her thoughts returning to Dr. Hale, his measured voice, the way his presence seemed to fill the small room without feeling oppressive. She never imagined a doctor could be so human. 20 minutes later, he returned with her chart in hand. "Good news," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "We've identified the problem. It's treatable, and you should start feeling relief within a day or two." The relief was so intense her eyes brimmed with tears. She tried to thank him, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead of hurrying away, he set the chart aside and leaned closer, his expression thoughtful. "If you don't mind me saying, you look like you've been carrying a lot on your own." The question was unspoken. "Are you all right?" Her breath trembled. "It's just been a difficult year." "Sometimes," he said, "the body makes us stop when we've been running too hard for too long." She nodded, unable to look away from the depth in his gaze. As she stood to leave, her hand brushed his. The contact was fleeting, accidental, and yet it sent a subtle jolt up her arm. His eyes darkened almost imperceptibly, as though he felt it too. "Take care of yourself, Miss Everhart," he murmured. "And if you need anything, you can always call." He handed her a small card with the hospital number, but when she glanced at it later, she saw that he had written his direct extension in careful script. Outside, the summer night was hushed and humid. Lila paused on the sidewalk, clutching the card to her chest, her heart hammering with something she couldn't quite name. She had come here mortified and afraid. She was leaving with more than just a diagnosis. She was leaving with the unsettling realization that her quiet, ordered life had shifted in a single evening. And somewhere behind her, in the glow of the ER's automatic doors, Dr. Nathan Hale stood watching as she disappeared into the dark, already wondering how a shy girl with wary eyes had managed to unmoor him in ways no one ever had. He turned back toward the nurse's station, but for the first time in a long while, his focus faltered. The monitors blinked their constant rhythm. Chart alarms sounded in the hall, but his thoughts kept drifting to the way her hand had felt against his, light as a breath yet inexplicably stirring. Nathan prided himself on maintaining boundaries, professional, clean lines that protected patients and protected him from the expectations people always had of a man with his reputation and wealth. But Lila Everhart hadn't looked at him like a celebrity or a savior. She had looked at him like a man. And that unfamiliar vulnerability in her eyes had struck something in him he hadn't known was still alive. He didn't allow himself to dwell on it further. There were more patients waiting, more charts to read, more emergencies to answer. And yet, each time he stepped into a new exam room, he felt as if a part of him remained in that quiet space she'd left behind, the echo of her voice still trembling in the air. Meanwhile, Lila walked the length of the parking lot with her head down, her pulse refusing to slow. She knew she ought to focus on the fact that she was going to be fine, that the pain would subside soon. But every time she thought of Dr. Hale, a flush bloomed across her cheeks. How ridiculous, she scolded herself. He was a physician, a professional, probably twice as experienced and worldly as she was. He had simply been kind, and she had mistaken that kindness for something personal. But when she unlocked her car, she couldn't resist glancing at the card again, as if to be sure she hadn't imagined it. His handwriting was elegant, the ink a deep blue that set her heart stuttering. Beneath the hospital's main number, a second line. Direct line, Dr. Hale. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling and tucked the card into her purse, feeling absurdly foolish and strangely alive. The next day, the symptoms had already begun to ease, but the memory of his voice lingered in her mind with every hour that passed. She tried to distract herself by shelving books, by making tea, by telling herself that she would never see him again. But just before noon, her phone rang. She stared at the screen, breath caught in her throat. The caller ID read, "Private number." For a moment, she almost let it go to voicemail. Then, heart hammering, she slid her thumb across the screen. "Hello, Miss Everhart?" His voice was unmistakable, low, calm, gently concerned. "It's Dr. Hale. I wanted to check in personally. Are you feeling any improvement?" Her pulse roared in her ears. "Why, yes. Much better already. Thank you so much for following up." "I'm glad to hear it," he said. She thought she heard something in his tone, hesitation, as if he were weighing each word carefully. "If you'd like, I can schedule a follow-up in a few days to be sure everything is resolved. But if you prefer, you're welcome to call me directly if you need anything." His voice softened. "Truly anything." She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the phone. I appreciate that. Really. Take care of yourself, Miss Everhart." "I will." When the call ended, she stood in the middle of the library's back office, her heart flaring with warmth and confusion she couldn't begin to name. For the rest of the week, she told herself it was just a kind gesture, a professional courtesy. But each time her phone vibrated with a brief text, just checking in. "How are you feeling today?" She felt her composure slip further. By the weekend, she was almost entirely recovered. The discomfort had receded into a faint memory, but the ache in her chest whenever she thought of him had only deepened. On Saturday afternoon, she was locking up the library when she saw a sleek black sedan glide to a stop along the curb. The driver emerged, smartly dressed in a discreet suit, and walked briskly around to open the passenger door. Her breath caught when Dr. Hale stepped out. He looked so different in the daylight, dressed in a tailored charcoal jacket and dark jeans. Less like a doctor, more like a man who belonged in another world entirely. "Miss Everhart," he greeted, his eyes searching hers as he approached. "I hope I'm not intruding." No, of course not." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I wasn't expecting to see you. His gaze flicked to the library's door, then back to her face. I was on my way to a meeting nearby. I thought, perhaps you might let me buy you a cup of coffee. Lila's throat went dry. You don't have to. I know, he said softly. I'd like to. A breeze stirred between them, carrying the faintest trace of summer blossoms from the planter boxes along the sidewalk. For a moment, she simply stood there, trying to understand how the shyest night of her life had led to this. Dr. Nathan Hale, the man everyone whispered about, asking her to coffee as though it were the most natural thing in the world. All right, she heard herself say. There's a little cafe around the corner. Perfect. They walked side by side down the block, and though neither spoke much, something eased in her chest with every step. In the warm afternoon light, he seemed less untouchable, more human. She dared a glance at him, and he caught her eye, his smile gentle and searching. At the cafe, he held the door for her, then ordered them each a latte. They found a small table by the window, and she watched his hands as he stirred sugar into his cup. They were steady, strong, hands that had seen countless emergencies. I hope this isn't too strange, he said after a moment, his tone careful. I know doctors aren't usually supposed to contact patients beyond medical reasons. She pressed her palms against the warm ceramic of her mug. I don't mind. He exhaled as if releasing a tension he'd been holding all week. I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how brave you were. And how. He broke off, looking out the window at the quiet street. You reminded me that people don't come to the ER only because they're sick. They come because they're afraid. Because they have nowhere else to go. I used to know that. But lately, I think I was forgetting. Lila felt something swell in her throat. I don't know if I was brave, she whispered. I was terrified. That's what makes it brave. They sat in silence, the sounds of clinking cups and low conversation swirling around them. Every minute that passed seemed to draw them closer, as though the invisible thread between them was tightening. I should probably be honest with you, he said finally, his voice a little husky. If this makes you uncomfortable, I'll walk away and never trouble you again. Her heart stuttered. What do you mean? I didn't come here just to check on you, he admitted. I came because I wanted to see you again. Her breath caught in her chest, her hands trembling against her cup. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now, he murmured. Just consider that maybe something good can come out of a night that began with fear. She looked at him across the small table, feeling the axis of her life tilt imperceptibly. Lila tried to gather her thoughts, but they scattered like petals in the wind. She had never been someone who invited attention, let alone from a man whose entire life seemed sculpted from success and confidence. Yet here he was, watching her with an openness that felt almost too much to bear. She pressed her hand over her heart, willing herself to breathe, to stay in this moment rather than shrink back into the shadows where she'd always hidden. Nathan reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, tentative but sure. The contact ignited something neither of them could disguise anymore, a slow, pulsing electricity that moved through her veins and seemed to lodge beneath her ribs. She wondered if he could hear the riotous drumming of her pulse as clearly as she could. You don't owe me anything, he said softly, his thumb grazing her knuckles. You don't have to feel pressured because I was your doctor. But I couldn't let you disappear without at least telling you the truth. Meeting you reminded me that there are still things I haven't allowed myself to hope for. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She felt as though she were standing on a narrow bridge, one side anchored in everything she had known, her quiet library, her safe routines, her small life, and the other side leading into something she could not name. A place bright with possibility, and terrifying precisely because it was unknown. She forced herself to meet his gaze fully. In his eyes, she saw no pity, no condescension, only a reflection of her own astonishment, her own vulnerability mirrored back to her. I never thought, she swallowed, her throat raw with unspoken truths. I never thought someone like you would notice someone like me. He frowned, leaning in closer. Someone like me? She gestured helplessly. You're brilliant. You're confident. You belong to a different world. A slow, almost rueful smile curved his mouth. Do you really believe that makes me so different? Lila, you saw me when I was just a man doing my best to help. You didn't care about the stories people tell about my family or my money. You were afraid and still honest. You trusted me when you had no reason to. That's what makes you remarkable. Her breath caught on a quiet, incredulous laugh. You think I'm remarkable? He nodded without hesitation. I think you're extraordinary." The word hung between them, impossibly tender, impossibly brave. It might have terrified her if it hadn't felt so achingly real. She lowered her gaze to their joined hands. 1,000 tiny doubts clamored inside her. Was this a whim? Was she imagining everything? Would he regret this tomorrow? But underneath the noise was a quiet certainty, a sense that no matter how improbable, no matter how sudden, some truths simply arrived without warning and changed everything. "Lila," he murmured, as though tasting the shape of her name, "I don't expect you to decide anything right now. But I want you to know that meeting you, it woke something up in me. A part of me that wants to be more than a name on a door or a reputation. I'd like to get to know you, if you'll let me." She lifted her eyes, finding herself pinned in place by the gentle ferocity of his hope. The ordinary world around them blurred and fell away. The cafe, the traffic beyond the window, the low murmur of other conversations. For a moment, it was just him and her, two people who had collided by chance and discovered, to their mutual astonishment, that they were no longer content to drift apart. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, her voice so low she wondered if he could hear it over the thundering in her chest. "Neither do I," he said. "That's what makes it worth finding out." Her heart twisted, and she realized she was smiling, not the shy, self-conscious curve of her lips she offered to strangers, but a smile she had never given to anyone, one full of something raw and new. "All right," she whispered. "We can find out together." His relief was palpable, a tension easing from his shoulders as if he'd been holding his breath for days. He brushed his thumb across the back of her hand one last time before letting go, as if to promise that he wouldn't rush her. "Can I walk you to your car?" he asked. She nodded, and they rose together. She felt impossibly light, as if her entire body were a breath away from floating. The sunlight struck his hair, caught in the angles of his face, and she thought, "This is real. This is happening, *." Outside, the late afternoon shimmered golden across the quiet street. He matched his steps to hers without a word, their arms brushing occasionally, each contact sparking a shy thrill that stole her breath. When they reached her old sedan, he paused beside her door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She watched the play of emotion on his face, hope, uncertainty, something like wonder. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, I'll be here." She looked up at him, feeling a tremor of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "What if I just want to see you?" His answering smile was so bright it made her dizzy. "Then I'll count myself the luckiest man alive." She laughed, the sound rich and a little shaky. "I think I'm the one who feels lucky." He shook his head. "Then maybe we both are." The world around them seemed to hush, holding its breath. For one impossibly sweet instant, she thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of the sidewalk, and she knew she wouldn't have stopped him. But instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing the barest whisper of a kiss against her knuckles. It was more intimate than any embrace, more honest than any confession. She felt the imprint of it all the way to her heart. When she finally slipped into her car, she sat behind the wheel, hands trembling around the ignition. He watched her through the windshield, his expression unreadable, but she saw the promise in his eyes. This was only the beginning. As she pulled away, she didn't feel shy or small or invisible anymore. She felt seen. She felt chosen. And she felt, for the first time in her life, like she had stepped into the story she'd always believed belonged to someone else. Driving into the dusky evening, she imagined what it would be like to see him again, to sit across from him in a quiet place, to discover who he was beneath the polished exterior everyone else saw. And perhaps, in the spaces between their words, she would discover who she was meant to become, too. In that moment, she understood that sometimes the most unexpected nights, the ones that began in fear and embarrassment, could open doors to something breathtaking. She smiled as the sky deepened to twilight, her heart certain of only one thing. Her life was no longer the same. And whatever lay ahead, she was finally ready to meet it.